Hey folks, Nick here from Another Booktube channel, and today I'm kicking off Garbaugust with something that I think is a really special treat. If you don't know, Garbaugust is the booktube event started by Criminali and co-hosted by myself and a slew of other incredible booktubers, where we celebrate trashy literature. Now, what is trashy literature? It's kind of open to interpretation. A lot of people, it differs from person to person. The mostly consensus of what makes something trashy is that it needs to be produced to specifically capitalize on something popular, usually produced quickly and cheaply. This is something like a novelization of something, or just something that is a direct ripoff of something. There's also trashy, just subject matter in general, books that are excessive in their violence, books that are excessive in their sex and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different types of trashiness out there, and there is a theme week every week this month where you are encouraged to read something trashy that fits that theme. Week one is anything goes. So this is, you get to kind of start off with whatever you want as long as you deem it to be trashy. And I wanted to do something really special for this first week. And I was at a thrift shop the other day, and I found a copy of this book right here. This is E-Modi or I-Modi. I don't know. This video is going to be hampered by the fact that I do not know Italian, despite the fact that I am an Italian American. The extent of the Italian I know is like pasta dishes and deli meats. But E-Modi is the world's first trashy book. This is the first erotic book ever published. This is obviously not a first edition. This particular edition was published in 1984, but it dates back. The origin of it dates back to the year 1524. And I am going to tell you all about E-Modi, or The Ways as it is translated to English. And I hope you find this little history lesson interesting. Let's get into it. So first, what is E-Modi? 16 very vulgar sonnets that accompany 16 pornographic engravings. So where did these engravings come from? What was the genesis of this book? Why did whoever put this together put it together? And what was the impact that it had on the world? So E-Modi began as a series of sketches. So there was an artist, Giulio Romano. Giulio Romano was a pupil of Raphael. Raphael being the famous Renaissance artist and eventual Ninja Turtle. Raphael was commissioned to paint the Sala di Constantino, which is a room inside the Pope's apartments within the Vatican. It's where the Pope lives, hangs out. So Raphael painted and redecorated the majority of what he was commissioned to do for the Vatican, but the Sala di Constantino was left undone. Raphael passed away before he can do the Sala. So Giulio took over, and while he was decorating the Sala, it's unclear as to why he put these sketches on there, whether it was just inspiration or whether it was because he was upset with the Pope for some reason. But whatever the reason was, he sketched 16 very vulgar engravings of classical couples having sex in a variety of ways. Classical couples meaning like people from classical lore, history, like Hercules and like Venus and those gods and stuff like that. Now this was probably completed around the year 1520. So how did these engravings end up in book format? So there was another friend of Raphael, which was Mark Antonio Raimondi. Now Raimondi was a patron of Raphael. They linked up in 1510 in Rome, and they began a printing enterprise specifically with the goal of reproducing engravings. So the printing press was less than 100 years old at this time, and it was primarily used for text, but engraving reproduction was becoming the next big thing, and they wanted to cash in on that. So in 1524, Giulio Romano had left Rome, but Raimondi, who knew Romano through Raphael, decided that he was going to reproduce and print those 16 sketches from the Vatican and put them into a book. And that book became the first edition of I Modi, or The Ways, or The 16 Pleasures, or a bunch of other names in Italian and their corresponding English translations. And it was an instant hit amongst the commoners, because images like that were not available to them. This was the first instance of publicly available pornography, essentially. And it was interesting to them, not just for the sexual aspect of it, but because they knew that these images are usually only available on the walls of the wealthy and the privileged. Like the Pope's apartments is where you can find stuff like this, but that's the only place you could find them. So these commoners, these peasants, were not exposed to this. And it was obviously very intriguing to them for a lot of reasons. It was also interesting because it revealed a hypocrisy within the church to these people, because the church very much preached that sex was something to like feel guilty about, or should be just very functional. It should be only a way to reproduce, to make more Christians. So this was a way for the commoners to get a sneak peek into how the upper class and the wealthy, how they got to experience sex, which is that they got to enjoy it. They didn't have to feel guilty about it. They got to do it, and they got to do it in a lot of different ways. Like, it wasn't just like really quick in and out perfunctory. Like, they were experimenting, like they were exploring. And so that was, a lot of fun. Now, of course, Pope Clement the Seventh, once he found out that this book existed and that his private room's engravings were circulating and were known as being something that were in his home, ordered every copy of the first edition of I Modi confiscated and destroyed, and Raimondi, the printer, was arrested for printing the material. At this point, Romano, again, he was out. He had left Rome, so he was not arrested for it. It was Raimondi for specifically publishing it and selling it. That was the crime there. Now, Raimondo, I've been saying Raimondo. Is it Raimondi or Raimondo? It is Raimondi. Sorry. Raimondi spent a year in jail until help arrived in the form of the poet Pietro Aretino. Is it Aretino? Yes, Aretino. I sorry, the Italian names keep tripping me up. I wanted to say Aretrino, but it's Aretino. So Aretino was very well liked by the Pope. He petitioned to have Raimondi released from prison, and it was successful. The Pope listened, and he let Raimondi go. But then Aretino turned around and decided, I'm going to collab with Raimondi, because I want to see these engravings. I want to see what caused this commotion. So Aretino saw them, because Raimondi still had the originals that they used to print. And Aretino said, all right, look, we're going to print this again, but this time I'm going to write poems, sonnets, to go along with each engraving. And it's going to be awesome. And so they did. And that became the second edition of I Modi, which was released in 1527. And these sonnets were filthy, as I'll kind of go into in a moment. But not only just were they generally very sexual, but Aretino did something where he implied in the text that the people in the engravings were actual individuals, like of like a high ranking or people of power in the world. So when those people found out about this new edition of I Modi, they demanded Aretino's arrest. He fled, and Raimondi also was able to escape being arrested again. But now the second edition was also confiscated and destroyed. So no copies of the first two editions of Emoji are left to exist. But obviously we still have them. And how is that? Well, piracy. People either kept their copies and they made copies of copies with other people. Also, the original engravings, I believe, survived in some capacity, so they were able to be reprinted that way. So in the end, we do still have all 16 sonnets and all 16 engravings. So when all that dust settled, basically what we've got in the 16th century is that Emoji was like the second best-selling book of that time period behind the Bible. And really, it was more important than the Bible in a lot of ways, because when the peasants or commoners that owned their own copy of the Bible didn't actually need to know how to read it. Like, actual literacy rates were very low because reading wasn't a necessity. And when it came to the Bible, they just had the priests and the church to explain everything and to preach to them. So the Bible was mostly just like something to hold and like just like a symbol. But with this, with Emoji, they wanted to read the sonnets. They wanted the smut. They wanted the trash. So literacy rates actually increased at the time because people wanted to be able to experience this. And so it's really the first instance of like an example where trash was a gateway into literacy. Like, that's how you get somebody who doesn't want to read, is by giving them something a little bit trashy that they've been told you shouldn't read that. Like, that's not what you should be reading. You should be reading this instead, the Bible. It's like, no. This actually sounds interesting to me. I'll learn to read for this because I got to know what they're doing in these engravings, which I think is great. Now, I did want to include in this video a section where maybe I showed a couple of the engravings. I still will. I'll do that. I'll try to post them here. I'm going to have to censor them because they are graphic. They're not exactly the best drawn, but they are, you could see body parts in them. And I thought that I would translate one of the sonnets into English using Google Translate because, oh yeah, this is entirely in Italian, by the way. I can't read this book. I tried Googling if there's been an English translation. If there was, it hasn't made its way online. But I thought, okay, let me use Google Translate because how bad can these sonnets really be? Like, how you always hear, this movie from the 50s was really controversial for its sexual content and its violence, and then you watch it and it's like you see worse things on like television at 4 p.m. like nowadays. It's embarrassing. So I was like, well, how bad can these sonnets really be? I picked one at random. I typed in the first line on Google Translate and it translated to, put your finger in my old man. So I can't, I'm not going to give you any more than that. I'm sorry. So, okay, I was still going to try to translate a full sonnet, but as I entered more into Google Translate, which is not a perfect mechanism, there was a lot of lines that just didn't translate one-to-one, and so it didn't really make a lot of sense. I didn't want to read gobbledygook, and I tried it with a few different sonnets, and I couldn't find one that worked. So just enjoy that first line that I gave you, and that'll give you an idea. Like, these were actually legitimately filthy and trashy. So that's the brief history of Emoji, the Ways, the 16 Pleasures by Giulio Romano, Marcantonio Raimondi, and Pietro Aretino. Great job, guys. You did your part to improve literacy in Italy in the 16th century. I hope you guys got a kick out of this video and that you learned something interesting. I'll be posting in the description the article where I found like a lot of the information about Emoji that I mentioned in this video, so you can check that out for more information. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today, but now it's time to get back to reading.